Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Radical Secular. My name is Christophe Difo. I'm coming to you from Jersey City, New Jersey, also known as Chilltown. And I'm here with our guests, Jordanna and Sean. I'll let them introduce themselves. Sean, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Radical Secular. My name is Sean Prophet, and I am in Henderson, Nevada.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordanna Thigpen, and I'm usually in Los Angeles, but I'm in Michigan right now. So nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. But we're so happy to have you. I think there's a lot of interesting things we're going to talk about. I want to, before we get into anything, because we tend to do this, and we do this, and we do t-shirts. So I'll do the t-shirt thing first. Actually, you know what? I'll go last because I'm doing the intro today. So why don't I let our guests go first?
All right. So this is my shirt. The time to seek happiness happens to be now. So
happy skeleton.
Yes. Happy our life.
Yeah. Well, I have Freddie Mercury because Freddie Mercury is a great man and very much stood for human rights. And that's what we stand for on this show so much. And I feel like, even though he's gone, he's always with us. I feel, when I went to the show with Adam Lambert playing his part, it really brought me back. So I got the shirt and, cheers to Freddie Mercury.
Cheers. And awesome. Again, I'm Christophe. And so this shirt is a Bad Religion t-shirt. Bad Religion is my favorite band, punk rock band from the 80s. It's actually older than I am. The guys are now in their sort of, they're like, boomers, I guess, but they're like super cool and also all about rationality and secularism, as distinct from atheism, but secularism. The reason why I'm wearing it today specifically is not only because I love the band, which is true, but also because, I was thinking earlier this week about the Portland, what's everything that's going on in Portland. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. But one of their albums that came out about 10 years ago was called The Descent of Man, Dissent of Man, which obviously is a play on the descent of man. But the beginning, the front of the album is a guy with a rock or throwing it at presumably, I don't know, but hopefully fascists. But it is, I was reminded of that given everything that's going on in Portland right now and around the country. So I figured I would give a little shout out to that. So I guess that sort of seals off our t-shirt part of the show. So
it's a good segue because if there's no dissent, there's no democracy. If you can't, if the idea of the redress of grievances, the right of assembly, all those things are what this protest represents, and so that's why it's so disheartening to see the government cracking down and really actually creating a whole new round of violence that never existed before. And I'm really happy that we have two attorneys on the show because I think we really need to explore this, like what's going on from a legal standpoint.
Yeah. The thing that is really striking right now is that, and we've encountered this, I'm sure, all in our daily lives, is that people are saying it's still my free speech right to speak fascist words. It's still my free speech right to stand for the oppression of other people. That is absolutely not your right to do that. And society over the course of hundreds of years has been proving that that is wrong and that's not the direction we want to go in. And yet people still insist that it's their right to speak in this manner. And it's just not. It's not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's in this sort of, I think this is a bit of a theme that we've talked about, right? We've talked a little bit about the First Amendment and what that means. Right? People sort of seem to think that free speech means freedom from consequence, right? Social consequences, or that free speech means that I just get to say and do whatever I want, right? And I like to think about it in terms of this sort of a positive freedom, like an idea of like, hey, not that like freedom is my freedom too is more important than your freedom to be free from, right? So like my freedom to yell the N-word at you is more important than your right to be free from oppression or free from fear or et cetera. And I think that's really important. I think that's a theme that we're continuing to see throughout, including with the masks, right? With the mask, right? So you have this thing where it's like, oh no, I have a right to spit my COVID-19 all over you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you don't though. You really don't, right? And that's, I think, kind of what you're saying, Jordanna.
Yeah. It's really outrageous to me that people also, the rights that they're focusing on, these alleged rights that they have, like in the example that you just used, not realizing that the right they're seeking to enforce is indeed the problem. No one's talking about whether someone has a right or not. It's like, we're asking you to look at this thing that you're fighting for and look at whether or not it still serves a purpose in a civilized society that's trying to solve these complex problems that we all face, when it just simply does not. Yeah,
that's so good. That's so right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, it's a shifting of focus. I mean, they're making it about this piece of cloth and not wanting to put a piece of cloth over their face, but what it's really about is other people's lives. And so it's just it's a deflection. It's a dishonest deflection. Like, who would say it's crazy that we even have to talk about it, because the idea that well, I can drive drunk if I want. I can I can wave my hand, and if it hits, when it hits your face, that's what. I don't know. It's just it seems like normal logic is just evading these people.
Yeah, it's the same thing with helmet laws in other states. Other states have different rules about helmets, and same with seatbelts. What it comes down to in the end is insurance companies getting involved, and they're just not going to be willing to pay these claims out anymore because the person doesn't want to wear the belt, or the person doesn't want to wear this helmet. It's like, I'm sure I don't live in a state in where there's no helmet law. And in California, we have a helmet law. I presume, I would hope, that in states that don't have a helmet law, there is a question on the insurance application. Do you wear a helmet when you're getting motorcycle insurance? Do you wear a helmet when you're riding? Now, a lot of people might lie and just say, oh yeah, sure, I wear the helmet. And then they go out and they're not wearing the helmet. They want that, quote, freedom. But, you could... The
company's not going to pay their claim then, right? If they lied on their application.
They could come up with some excuse. I mean, people can always commit fraud, right, in an insurance claim or settlement, discussion. But, it's again, that not thinking about the person that they might cut in front of someone, then they get in an accident. Now somebody's losing their house or bankrupt because of this accident that, couldn't be avoided. And obviously there's going to be a trial, et cetera. But the point is that it's that not thinking about the consequences, that simple act, a person has to go out that day without the helmet, could end in the loss of someone's home, their bankruptcy, loss of their family, et cetera, and have these consequential effects down the line. Nobody wants to think about that. All they want to think about is the cult of the individual, the cult of the self, when right now we're being called to a much higher purpose,
Well, yeah, and COVID itself is even places where there's not a mask law, isn't it possible that if someone gives someone else COVID, that's a tort? I mean, isn't that a civil tort that could be claimed?
There have been some cases about this, but the issue is the causation. It's going to be really, really difficult, I would think, to prove, because unless the person was like totally a hermit and could prove they had sealed themselves hermetically in the home, and then, they went out that day and interacted with a single person. But even then, who's to say it didn't come from a package or from what, so there's always going to be that causation issue. You're always just going to have that issue of the proof, the failure of proof, I would think. I mean, God bless the people who are trying to make these claims. I think that the best case, no pun intended, it would be the ones where like there have been, it seems to be a pattern, worship, for example. Going into a church setting, singing, full-throated singing. There's certain activities that are causing more infection. But I know people who have tried and who are bringing claims, for example, failure to provide PPE, the employer's failure to provide PPE. Obviously, those cases are going to wind their way through the courts. I'm not sure of the status of McConnell's efforts to get something passed that is going to have broad immunity for corporate employers. That would benefit small business.
What's the end game in terms of like right now, it seems like mask use is stepping up a little bit as the numbers go up. It seems like people are kind of getting the message finally, but do we have to pass, mask laws with, with heavy penalties, or is it going to be some other legal remedy? I mean, how do you stop people from exercising their individual rights to do this?
I think it's just the social shaming, and also, the pocketbook of these insurance companies. I mean, I think with seatbelts, this was a multi-decade effort of the NTSB and insurance companies and car manufacturers. Nobody wanted to get on board. I mean, and I'm sure you guys remember this, I remember being a kid, and my mom would, even though we had seatbelts, she would always reach across and put her arm. And when I was old enough, I finally was like, well, why do you do this? And she said, well, we didn't used to have seatbelts. So if I had to hit the brake, if you were in the car and you had to hit the brakes, and it's like, it's an old habit, like you just trying to protect, I mean, this took decades, and people still don't wear their belts all the time, they still get in accidents without the belt,
That's fascinating. It's funny. I remember very much with my mom, doing I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but that's funny. I definitely remember that. But a couple of things come to mind. You were talking, Sean, about the how do you sort of enforce this? And the way that our culture is such that, right, this sort of the cult of the individual, I think, was a really great way to put that, because, right, because that's what we're seeing with the masks, that's what we see with the seatbelts, and there seems to be a lack of sort of a sense of civic duty that other countries for some reason have, right? So it is certainly true in sort of Japan, right, where it just like everyone wears a damn mask all the time, right? Like that is right. So, and there's a sense of like, oh yeah, we're part of a larger group. And I wonder, and part of what we're trying to do here and trying to figure out on this show, on the Radical Secular, is developing or thinking about how do you create a cohesive without using religion. How do you create a cohesive sort of structure that people feel a part of, such that they want to help their fellow citizens? Last week we talked with John Kierbo, and he had some really great ideas on this. Basically, in terms of engaging conservatives, right? Because the people who don't want to do this are typically conservatives, right? So, how do you engage them in a way that creates a unifying culture? And I think that's a really tough problem. I mean, I think that's a really tough problem. I think that as we talk about this here and elsewhere, this is, I think, going to be like in the future with in a society that gets increasingly less religion focused, right? And with churches that hold that with glue, how do you solve that problem of cohesiveness?
Yes.
There was a good example that was, I saw this meme, and it actually, it really kind of solidified it for me. And that is that this has to be a norm, because you can't arrest everybody who's not wearing a mask. You can't arrest everybody who is rude or litters or whatever like that. It's just not going to work. And this particular example was talking about, do you return your grocery cart when you're finished with it? Because it's something that, everybody should do it. And yet there's nothing that's going to happen to you if you don't. And so, it really is kind of the measure of your citizenship as to whether you do things that you don't have to do. Do you pick up trash when you're hiking? Do you, there's all these various things that people can do to sort of help. And that really does establish your ethics as a person, as a human being.
I think that people, there's a fine line between pride, what I'll call pride in our government. I'm proud to be an American. I am, I'm proud of our democracy. I'm proud that we have a framework for solving problems that is supposed to work. Okay, it has not been working as well as we maybe planned, and there's been a lot of holes that have been exposed and loopholes because we've never had someone that's taken advantage of it in this particular manner. Okay, this is the black swan that we, that the wild card, I guess, that we've been waiting for, right? And thank God, in a way, that we have it, and it could be worse. It might still get worse. We don't know. It could be worse. There could be a nuclear war situation going on in connection with this, right?
Right.
Time will tell, but we think that's pretty good odds that that's not going to happen at this point. I mean, yeah, we hope. Okay.
Last year, we never would have expected a pandemic, and so that's like, you just don't know. It's a test of the system, and obviously it failed. And he would also fail at nuclear war, and he would fail at just about anything else.
He fails at everything that he does because he is a failure. But we can have pride, in our system and in our country as a whole. And it has done evil things, bad things, yes. But it's also done a lot of good and has brought peace and prosperity on particular levels at particular times. There's things to find pride in. So if we can join the positive nature of being an American with a healthy awareness of, okay, we still have a lot of work to do, guys. Like, we are solving some very systemic problems here. Then I think, that's a way forward. We just have to help people find that good, and help people find that positivity and something to have a healthy pride in. Because pride, if unhealthy, goes to arrogance. And nobody wants arrogance. That's been always the American arrogance. We don't want that anymore for the world.
And it's really hard to feel, that pride. When you see, especially like we keep promising to talk about Portland, and I think we really should talk about it, because we're seeing something unprecedented in our country, where we have actual private security they don't even work for our government, working for an agency where the head of the agency hasn't been confirmed at all by Congress. They're an acting agency head, and we've got these mercenaries coming in and just arresting people without reading. They're not being read their rights. They're not, the people aren't identifying themselves. It's just totally lawless. So again, as attorneys, I gotta get both your take on this.
I am not a civil rights attorney, and so I don't want to go crazy with this. But I was interested to see the claims that are being brought, right? And I know so I went and read the ACLU complaint, and the ACLU complaint, they had a complaint out against the Portland police before any of this started, and so they went ahead and got leave to amend the complaint, and they added the federal agencies, like amorphous federal agencies that are sort of involved here, and the claims seem to be First Amendment claims, right? The assembly claim is the obvious one. Then you have a Fourth Amendment claim, searches and seizure, right? And then but I thought the most interesting thing was sort of the Oregon claims under the Oregon Constitution as well, which I thought was fascinating, right? Because the Oregon Constitution is much broader. The argument is much broader protection than sort of the floor set on the federal level. So, I wonder where that's going to go. I'm really interested to hear Jordanna's take on this as an active practicing attorney in this area. So please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was really interested to see the denial on the basis of standing. And the governor's reaction was, well, if I don't have standing, then who does? So presumably, there's these individual lawsuits that are going to be, wending their way through for excessive force. I saw someone I know had a post on their page from another page about a professor of history who was shot in the head.
Yes, I saw her.
Yeah. So, and with, very dramatic photos, et cetera, obviously that person has a potential claim. What I'm interested in is the exact identity of these people, which I don't think has been clarified at this point. I'm thinking, this company that's supplying these individuals, or this shadowy,
it's Eric Prince. It's back to Eric Prince all over again.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we, exactly who
or
is
someone
involved.
like him. I'm not saying he's the one, it's not his company. We don't really know whose company it is, but it is that same type of person who is, profiting from privatizing, what should be a U.S. government function.
Yeah. I mean, in California, we have what's called the unfair business practices, the UCL, unfair competition law, a claim for unfair business practices. This is one potential theory, one potential avenue for liability. Again, standing, after 2004, we had Proposition 64, which said that, you have to be the one harmed. It used to be anybody could bring a claim. So then a company was out there, a bad actor, you could just bring a claim. And so I'm not sure if Oregon, I'm sure, has a comparable statute. I'm not as familiar with Oregon law, but presumably, if this thing were to occur in California, this could be a potential claim is, to get at that corporate liability and to take them outside of the government immunity. That's what we need to do, is to go after these intentional acts because I don't believe that these are actual sworn law enforcement. And I think that's all going to come out in the wash that, you know,
they're not even trained cops. They're mercenaries. They're people who would be more at home fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere.
And they probably have done that as well, right? Under the color of, maybe, we don't know. We still don't even know. I don't think that, I saw one photograph. I think it's that one that's going around where it shows a blonde female, you know, kind of reaching back, and there's an officer holding her. I was struck by this photo in that, to me, both of those people looked terrified. The officer's face, if you look at his face, his eyes are very wide. This is not a person who's, you know, smashing the protesters in a resolute effort. This person looked terrified and knows that he is violating the rights of this human being on another level, on a fundamental level, and trampling on our Constitution.
Right.
This, I think, is, we can, you know, at least in California.
That's how it starts. I mean, I think these guys, you know, they're human beings, you know, initially, and they're going, well, I need this paycheck and, you know, whatever it is. I mean, they're people like anybody. And so in the beginning, they're going to be like horrified, but over time that will get worn down to the point where they will turn into completely ruthless thugs because, you know, they reinforce each other. They obviously, you know, they get together when they're getting in their uniforms or wherever they go, you know, they're all kind of buddies. And it's going to be like cops, you know, where initially you might think that there would be some morality, but later it's just going to be, you know, we got a job to do. And these aren't people. These are, you know, just
whatever. I wonder though, I think that's a great point. I wonder though, as I'm thinking about this, right? Because ICE is notorious in this way of like toxic, right? Like just sort of like, and again, I actually know tangentially an actual ICE officer, right? And he seems like a perfectly nice guy. But I'd also know police officers that seem like that are perfectly nice people, like when you talk to them, right? But like there's something that happens when a bunch of especially men get together, right? And there's sort of like, and there's an indoctrination that happens, right? And there's sort of like, and that is what the police academy ends up being about in a lot of ways, right? Sort of into a certain way of thinking things, and also a certain way of looking at the people that you have to sort of police, right? As sort of other. I wonder, though, that in terms of mercenaries, how that might be a bit different, right? Because the culture is a little bit more diffuse, right? You just have a bunch of guys, sure, they used to be in the military, right, or wherever they were, but now they've been like basically like they work for some company, and you know. So I agree with you that sort of mentality probably over time could take hold, but I wonder, and I'm just talking to Jordanna's point, this cop, like, or whoever he was, like terrified, and obviously this is not what he does all the time. There's a big distinction between that and some guys dumping out water bottles in the desert, right? Because they literally hate these people, right?
Yeah. It is a form of a tribe mentality, like you said, like a pack. They pack up, you know. Sean and I were talking about this. The notion of tribalism is like, you know, and this is a statement from people on both sides of the political spectrum. It's like, well, you know, you can never solve these problems of racism, systemic racism, and, you know, you can never solve these problems of nationalism because this is how people are. You know, they're just tribal.
Don't even try.
Don't even try.
Yeah, just abrogating responsibility completely to do anything about the problem. That sense of helplessness to just give up, to say, well, it's just how human beings have lived for 200,000 years. You know, first of all, human beings have been around a lot longer than that. You know, they've been right. But it's outrageous to me that someone would just abrogate all responsibility to take action, to actually do things that they can, to vote, to run for office, to help people who are speaking the truth run for office, and that who want to actively change and defeat oppression and injustice, that they would just abrogate responsibility to the notion of tribalism. It's outrageous.
Absolutely. That's such a really great point. And you know, and this gets back, like, I'm still looping this back into what we were talking about in the first instance, which is this idea of like that there isn't a, like, you know, that it's not in our power, or it's not our job to solve problems, right? Like, because like, and that's a sort of fundamental problem, right? So like the idea that like the government should not be in the business of solving human problems. So like, because relatedly, the idea, like, sort of the idea that we are somehow separate from the government, right? That we aren't, right? Because the idea of representative government is that it's representative of people, right? And so the government, so they are supposed to help us solve our problems. But then you have this sort of conservative approach, which is just like, no, I don't owe anybody anything. And whatever problems come up, we'll just let them happen because, hey, human beings are bad, right? Human beings are inherently bad, right? That's like the original sin concept. Oh, well, I'm just going to take care of me and mine.
These guys are very, very willing to, you know, they're like, oh, you can't solve any of these problems. If you do, it's a utopia, you know, but they're more than
that's a bad thing.
Dystopia. They are willing to actively support dystopia, but we can't have utopia. That would be a problem. You know?
Yeah. There's a really interesting book. In fact, it is called Utopia. I forget the author. I had to read it in college. And it's about a portion of California that's basically become this notion of utopia. And it is still, the tribalism is still prevalent. I think that's been a common theme in any of these books that are about a prospective utopia, is that actually it ends up devolving or, you know, falling apart at some point because of tribalism, because of factions. This happens in employment as well. And Christophe, you're, you know, formerly actively working as an employment attorney. I am also working in that field now. And, you know, there is this factions that develop, and it contributes to a lot of harassment, is that certain employees will form a coalition against another set of employees. And this, yes, it is a problem, but that doesn't mean it's insurmountable. That doesn't mean it's unsolvable, right? And
it's the structure. I mean, anybody who knows about the Stanford prison experiment knows that you can take just normal individuals, you put them into a place where their role is, you know, where you've got guards and you've got prisoners, you've got, you know, bosses, you've got employees. Anytime you put people into roles, you get this factionalism that happens, which is why I think that this system it's all about system design, right? So getting back to these mercenaries, like, I don't really want to have to care about their ethics. I want them to wear body cameras. I want them to be watched. I want somebody to be watching the watchers. I want, you know, newspaper reporters there and television reporters there. You know, like there's not a single group of people in the world who you can allow to operate without checks and balances, without some sort of accountability. And that's what I see here, is that if you've got cops, okay, at least, sure, cops have the, you know, they can be abusive and they have the police unions protecting them, but at least there's a chain of command. You know, the mayor can hold the police accountable, right? Yes. Who is holding these DHS officers who don't even work for the government accountable? You know, where's the recourse? And that's where I think this lawsuit, I mean, sure, there were human rights violated, but we really ought to be looking at the larger issue of, you know, how this is being managed and controlled from the top, you know, and that goes back to I guess Barr, right? William Barr and Trump, you know, and an unconfirmed agency head.
Yes, that is an issue, as well as, you know, the inspector general, or, you know, any type of audit that can be done. But this takes time. This is something that's not going to happen, you know, next month, right? It's going to take years before these audits come out. And even when we do have these commissions and these blue ribbon commissions, I mean, a lot of evidence is concealed from us as members of the public under the guise of classified information. These unnamed agencies, which, I mean, I remember being young, and, you know, you had the FBI and the CIA, you know, but there's just this proliferation. It's like every day I read about a new acronym, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Where do they come from? You know, they're coming out of the woodwork now, you know, and it's just more black ops. There's a lot of redundancy, and, you know, they get to classify such massive swaths of their budget. We will never really know what is being spent on these unlawful activities.
Right.
It's a fact. Like, you know, a cop, we kind of know what cops make, you know, I don't know, it was anywhere from like $50,000 to $70,000 a year or something like that. You know,
more than that.
Way more than that, man. Like with OT, forget about it.
Yeah.
They're in like 100, 110s, 120, you know, easy.
But these mercenaries start at like 175 or something. It's like,
like
they make a lot more money, you know? And so that's another reason, like, more money, less accountability. I mean, I think John Kirby was even alluding to that last week. He was saying that he had been a whore of war at one point, which meant that he was working for one of these private contractors, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's this, they're middlemen, right? I mean, the taxpayer's paying their bill, you know, and then they're paying these workers like outrageous salaries that are far beyond what the military or the police actually would normally make.
And that is a really terrifying sort of prospect, right? The idea of sort of privatizing war in general is a terrifying prospect. Privatizing, right? Because as soon as you privatize things, right, and this is obvious, but once you privatize things, right, then there's no public oversight at all, right? I mean that's what makes privatizing things very, very attractive to people who just want to make money hand over fist. And this is also a huge problem with the sort of the the contract, what's the word, government contract, sort of like in general, right? Like the entire idea, right? You talk about pork and waste. I mean, it's atrocious. So, but like what you and I wanted to say what you sort of piggyback on what you were talking about, Sean, or at least acknowledge, and that is the accountability factor, right? We like every psychological sort of any like Psych 101, right? It's like people behave better when they have accountability. People, right? And this also goes to what you were talking about, Jordanna, right? And this idea that like, right, if people are unsupervised, if people don't have some sort of structure around them, people will be selfish. Human beings are selfish animals. We are selfish animals, and we tend to, and we also tend to try and do things with the least amount of effort, and that usually means cheating, right? And that's why rules are so critical. And so I just think that in terms of this was what drives me crazy about libertarianism too. Libertarianism hasn't come up in our conversation recently, and we'd like to just pound on libertarianism on this show.
Pound on them. They're the ones who don't return
terrible.
They don't return the grocery cards. They don't.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh my God, that's a great example. Exactly, because like, wait, I shouldn't have to. Right?
That's somebody else's job. Some flunky can take back my cart. That's the attitude, and this is how norms get decay over time. And what Trump's presidency has mostly been norm shattering, right? Because there are laws that he's broken, but more it's just like there were people, he was expected to do certain things. He was expected, not to, for example, fire his own inspector general, right? Who, he's breaking all these norms. And so I don't know what the solution is, because you have to replace these norms with laws, but then laws require that people mostly comply voluntarily. So
we're going to need a solution to this problem, of where people have felt like they are just unfettered to do whatever they please and say whatever they please, and speak in a fascist or a racist manner without any consequences whatsoever. Which, of course, people have been doing that for a long time, but it's reached a crescendo. It has reached a crescendo.
Now we got cameras. Everybody's got a camera, so we're seeing it for the first time.
We are.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. Right? We're like, great, and again, that is a sense of like crowdsourced accountability, essentially, right? So, and that's why it works, right? That's why it forces change, because people behave differently when they are under scrutiny. I mean, it's just, it is always true, and it always will be true. I had something I was going to say. It was going to be brilliant, but I just lost it.
Well, maybe I think this is probably a good time to, because you had mentioned, Jordanna, in our pre-show conversation about how we find, in the midst of, because we're talking about all these terrible things that are happening, and how these, our country is really not the same as it was 3 years ago, and how do we maintain, as liberals, through this whole thing, a sense of hope and persistence.
Yeah, this is a topic that is very important and very significant to dialogue about, and to have some ready solutions for people who are reaching a point of fatigue and hopelessness and fear and anxiety. Obviously, we're dealing with not only a pandemic and the loss of many of our jobs, our income, our source of stability, and that of our families. Everyone has been touched by this in every way. There's no one that's untouched. But the issue becomes, how do we not succumb to that? And there is a duty for those of us who are aware of the problem, I believe, to rise above this problem and to be a beacon for others who are struggling. And we're all going to go in different waves of it. Some days you have a bad day. Some days you're at your breaking point, and you hopefully can build a community of people that can support you. But even when you can't, you have to reach down inside yourself, and you have to find that flame, and you have to keep nurturing it and slowly building it so that it becomes a raging fire of knowledge that we will come through this. We will come through this, and we will be victorious. And how do you do that? Well, there's a few different ways that we can do this. First of all, you have to stay informed and stay educated. And even, I have never wanted to do this, but I've started doing it. As I've started going on to websites and news sources that I have always, for years, turned my back on because I realized that they were not the views that I wanted to see. But I at least want to be aware of how the same news is being presented in these forums, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can start to see the knowledge that these people are getting, a lot of it is just flatly wrong. So, and a lot of it is wrong on the science, a lot of it is wrong on the facts. Mm-hmm. Educating yourself about that and then being able to pass that knowledge on to people, I think that's a major point. I think it's a major step, I should say. Mm-hmm. But the knowledge, the real issue is this sense of hope. We have to do whatever it takes to convey to people. We can't give up. This is not the time to give up. Even without the pandemic, we'd still be in this situation of anxiety. So it's like, it's all in with the anxiety. It's all in with the despair. Let's rise above it. Let's find the flame inside ourselves and keep building that fire until it's going to burn. It's going to burn through to victory. I believe this.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I think that we can see this is that things are happening now that might have been unthinkable, like the wholesale removal of these statues. Even though now they're protecting the statues and all that, but there have been many, many hundreds of statues in Capitol buildings, in public squares, all over the country that have come down. They're coming down. I mean, some came down last night. They took down Columbus in another city last night. And so there's all these statues that are coming. That would have been unthinkable. The renaming of the military bases that I think may go through, because I think that even Republicans are going to vote to override a presidential veto, and Trump knows it. So I think he's losing on this one. So there's that. There's the fact that, sports teams are now painting Black Lives Matter on, in the stadiums. Like it is, and now we're having everybody taking a knee. It's only maybe before it was like one guy taking a knee, and now everybody except one guy is taking a knee, and so we're to the point of holdouts now instead of where this is only one person. So let me try to think of what else. There's a whole host of things in the country that are continuing to shift. Even the recent transgender rights decision by the Supreme Court to include that in sex discrimination is a huge deal.
That's really huge. That was huge.
Also, the understanding that somebody like Gorsuch, for example, is not the right-wing ideologue that he was painted as. He's come down with the liberals on a number of issues. Now, he's not ideal, but he's certainly not the Federalist Society hack that everybody thought that he originally was. And that Kavanaugh is, and that's unfortunate. But
that is unfortunate. I think, thank you both for saying that for that, because I really do think that's important. I am finishing up a piece that I'm writing and will be publishing early next month, and it's all about this idea of my experience going from the day George Floyd died until today, right? And it has been a hell of an evolution, right? And it also talks about, I also talk about how I felt about things before George Floyd died, which was in some ways far less hopeless, right? Like far more hopeless, right? And so, and there is, I think, I read an article in the New York Times recently, and there are a lot of things to be happy about. Now, when Trump was first elected, I think in particular for people of color and for women, it was, and for anyone who cares about justice, it was one of the most devastating days of my mornings of my entire life. I literally just rolled out of bed and just called out sick and just stayed in bed all day long. I just didn't have it in me to get up. I was, this was an America that I didn't know, right? And it was a brave new world of terror, frankly, especially in 17. 17 was terrifying. It really seemed like we were going to be under a fascist dictator and they were coming for us, right? So, but not long after that, it became clear that this guy, and after 17, it became clear that at least Trump is incompetent. And he also brought out all of the things that everyone here has been drums that we've been beating for years about the way America is. Now it is obvious to everyone. Systemic racism is real. Sexism is real, right? Misogyny is real, right? The old boys clubs at the top of companies are fucking real. All of that is real. And now everyone agrees. I mean, everyone who's reasonable is like, you know, hey, maybe they were right this whole time. And you know what's really infuriating? And I wrote right about this in the piece, because my first reaction was like, where the fuck have you all been all this time? We've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for fucking 15 years. Where have you been? And that was my initial reaction. But then I had to sort of check myself and be like, don't make this about you. This is a great moment. It might get worse before it gets better. But look, finally, the issues are at least salient. Everyone agrees on the issues at least.
Yes.
Well, you know what I would say about George Floyd is that George Floyd is at least a martyr who didn't die in vain. There are so many of these other black men, mostly, who've been shot, who died kind of in vain, you know, in the sense that Philando Castile, you know, it was talked about.
That one got me, like, so that was the one, like, honestly, that was a tipping point for me, where I was just like, I was able to keep an emotional distance from it until that Philando Castile was a turning point, because he did
everything right, including having a gun permit,
fucking thing right. You know, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Sean. Go ahead.
That's all right. No, I was done. I mainly just wanted to say that, to underscore what you said, in the sense that that yes, now, you know, George Floyd did not die in vain. He did not die in vain, and things are changing. But I also wanted to throw it over to you, Jordanna, because I wondered what you thought about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's speech on the House floor. That must have been thrilling.
You know, it was very nice to see that she was able to make such eloquent points about a systemic problem that women have experienced. The only thing that there was nothing surprising to me whatsoever about how this Mr. Yoho responded. The name, by the way, alone, sorry to say, it's just ridiculous. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like, come on.
What's the name? Come on. Like, really?
Come on. You can't make this stuff up. Right.
Like, it's almost like a fake name.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
He wanted to run for office and he picked him. It's not what happened. I mean, I feel bad for anyone else with that name. But anyway. But yeah, I was so non-surprised to see this man come and try to use the wife and daughter's excuse. This is the same thing. Like, I have black friends.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, okay, well, but you weren't a friend to this black person, right?
Right.
You weren't acting in a fatherly, a gentlemanly way, quote unquote, to this woman. So I don't give a fuck about your wife and daughters. Okay. Yeah. And by the way, does man not know that a lot of men with wife and daughters molest and beat and rape and abuse their daughters? So what does this mean? Like,
it doesn't even mean anything. Yeah. No.
It's very similar. There was a story, you know, it was literally about a guy who was fucking horses. Okay. And,
Jesus Christ.
How bad does it get?
I mean, this is like spinning down the drain.
I swear I could dig this story up. Okay. He was fucking horses, and other people were like, "Oh, we're so surprised. He's such a good Christian." Like, what?
Yeah.
What? This is the defense. You know, he's a good Christian man. He's a family man. He believes in God. You know, all these things are defenses of this terrible behavior, and it could be anywhere from, you know, what Yoho said to, you know, bestiality. You know, so it's like, and it's just used as a get out of jail free card, and that's what pisses me off.
I think that was one of the beautiful parts of the speech, is to highlight that, like to recognize this in a systemic manner, rather than just getting up and complaining and saying, hey, the guy called me a fucking bitch. Like, this is so disgusting. And, you know, I especially liked the idea. She wasn't even going to complain about it at all. Mm-hmm. It was just going to be like, oh, it's another day being a woman in society. Like, you know, and she made some really good points too about, I've lived in New York City. Like, I've bartended, I've waited tables. Like, I've thrown people out for this kind of language, like for treating me. I've been harassed on the street. Like, we all have, as a woman, you know, we have been a source of prey. It happens less to me now as I get older, which is one of the reliefs of getting older, honestly, in this society, is that I have to deal with less street harassment. It's great. I love getting older. Like, let me just tell you. You know, but it's been something that we've had to contend with, you know, and you know, and always, you know, the focus being on us, right? It's just the same as, the Black parents have to have the talk, right? Like I've been reading about this a lot, and as a white female, I've never had to have the talk about, well, you have to behave this certain way if you're around law enforcement, because it was always just presumed that I'm going to be polite and nice and go along to get along, because as a woman, that's how I've been socialized. But also because as a safety, just a statistical reason, I have had the privilege to walk around in society in a particular way and not have my actual life at risk per se. Now, that doesn't, from law enforcement. However, of course, there have been men, predators, who are out there. And, I find it very interesting too, and I'll say this, is because this is something that really gets to me is, and I posted the other day, like, can I just go one day without hearing the word pedophile or seeing it? Can I just go a day without seeing a news story about a pedophile? Please. And I get that this is something we need to deal with. And I'm glad, that people are, okay, abuse is, it's not normal and we shouldn't have this. But obviously no one's blaming these victims. It's a little bit different. But the idea is that we are not talking about the systemic problem with men and how they've had the freedom to just do whatever they please with no consequences. And so I think a speech like AOC's was a good starting point to start having this dialogue, that we can no longer allow people to simply abuse without having that be the main focus of an article, that be the main focus of a dialogue. This is the issue, is the lack of consequences and the lack of accountability.
Yes, that is so well said, and I just like relate a real quick story. So like years ago, this is before I met my wife, like years ago, and I was dating a woman, and I remember I wrote to her, and I'm embarrassed to admit this about myself, and I'm embarrassed to admit this about myself. This is a long time ago, but I remember being agitated by and being like, oh, so you're a feminist, as if that was a bad thing, or as if like, and I was very ignorant of everything at the time. And I remember this woman systematically teaching me basically that like, it hadn't occurred to me that when I walk down the street, I don't worry about being harassed. I don't worry about being raped. I don't worry about these sort of things. I just, and it's funny because as a person of color, I can identify with that because I think about that about white people all the time. White people don't realize that what it's like, frequently just doesn't even occur to them, And so I just think it's like, I try and make it my responsibility now to be a vocal ally. I think a lot of you get the sort of toxic masculinity response to that, which is like, like how what are you standing up for women? And like, so my point is that like hearing people like AOC sort of talk about this, and you talk about this, Jordanna, and talk about this and sort of like wrapping that sort of, connecting that to my experience as a person of color and just thinking like, well, what, and like how, like, it just, it's the same fucking thing. It's the same fucking thing. And again, I'm embarrassed to admit that I couldn't see that for years. I just couldn't see that. And it's interesting because it gives me a sense of compassion, I guess, for white people. I grew up around white people my whole life. So like I have a sense of compassion towards white people in general, but this really helps me be like, okay, maybe, people really just don't fucking know. And once they're told and then ignore it, then like, fuck you. But like, in the first instance, like, all right, here is what you're not seeing,
There should be like a VR, like a game.
Yeah. Oh, what a great idea.
Like people could be, and like they would for people to really immerse themselves. Like I've thought of this game. I hope someone makes it, but like, it could be like Sims, for politics, and all politicians are required to do it, where they have to like build a government, and that's like a requirement. Like if you're going to run for office, you have to play this game and like have a good, score between a certain. So it's almost like a test, but like you can't take office, you can't take your oath, can't even run until you go through the training. and you're literally, you know, Sims, I guess you build and sometimes they die or whatever, like the farm fails or whatever.
Right.
But you could do it. You could model real government. You could do that for politicians. I think that'd be a great idea.
It would be so good, but I would love for there to be also like a VR or an AR experience where people could come into the VR experience. And I've never even done a VR, so I should do it, I guess, to know if this would really work. But they would be able to choose the avatar that they could be, and it would just be a normal day, you know, just going about the day. And so now you're trying on, like, I want to see, what is it like to walk around as a Black male? What is it to, you know,
walk around as a woman,
as a Muslim male? I want to see, I want to experience this, you know?
Well, and particularly as an attractive woman, you know, and street harassment, that would be, you know, because there's been a number of videos about that, you know, showing, but I would love to have it, like you said, from the perspective, you know, so you put on the goggles and you walk down the street, you see what that would be like. But, you know, I just, before we go on, I want to say that, Christophe, that was really interesting what you said. And I had a similar arc of evolution as a man. I was raised, you know, we were both raised in the same church. And in that church, there was a high degree of respect for women that was taught, more so than I think in most churches. And also because of the fact that contact between the sexes was discouraged, you know, unless people were married. You know, there's not a lot of flirting and dating and all that. So we were already very reserved in the way that we behaved toward women. But I did come out of there still with a lot of, you know, patriarchal attitudes and a lot of things that, you know, over time in my life, the various women who I've been with have taught me about sexism and about these things. And I definitely went through an evolution, because there was a time when I felt like, you know, maybe men were getting the short end of the stick with, you know, divorces and child support and, you know, and child custody and all of those things. You know, that's what really gets a lot of these MRAs started.
True.
Is all of that, you know, and then they start to think of it as a zero-sum game. And then it goes way beyond, divorces. It goes into other areas of life. Oh, women, you know, they're too powerful. They're becoming too powerful. They're becoming professionals. I have to work with them. You know, I have a female boss. Oh, you know, and
God forbid.
So it definitely has been an evolution, and I've come to the point now where I feel that as a man that I'm not taking really my responsibility unless I call out other men when I see this stuff happening. And I think 100%. That, you know, I wrote a post about it this morning and like saying, you know, like, guys, we have everything. We have all the power. We're overrepresented in government. We're you know, there's way more male cops, doctors, lawyers, professionals of all kinds. You know, we make more money per hour. Like, what skin is it off our nose to be respectful towards and allow this equalizing process to happen? You know, what is it that is so abhorrent about that? You know,
no one's asking, you know, to walk in front at this point. Everyone
right.
walk and march together as in a line of equality. This is it. You know, this is all that's ever been asked for. And exactly. The idea that someone would deny that, it's just like in Hollywood. You know, I just worked mostly doing entertainment litigation for the past 5 years. And Hollywood, you know, there's a lot of attitude among people who work in Hollywood that, you know, in making deals, like, well, you know, if you get yours, then that means I don't get mine. So I have to actively work to try to prevent you from getting yours. And obviously, you know, you're directing a film, there can only be one director, right? You're writing a screenplay, they're going to pick someone's screenplay. But this notion that there can't be multiple people working together, or that there can't be collaboration, or that, you know, you're going to do a scorched earth to just drive someone out of the industry, which I've seen happen in some cases I've worked on. It's like, why are you doing this? I mean, you can watch someone else be successful. There is plenty of resources. This notion of scarcity, it really, I think, has its roots in our society, where people were the origin story of America, where people were just literally scrabbling for food, dying of diseases, having a short life expectancy. We are still living under the collective genetic trauma that we've gone through decades and hundreds of years, centuries, eons of bare survival. And it's despite the hegemony that certain members of our society have had, they just can't let that go. You know, instead of realizing, like, wow, look at this amazing thing that we've built. Now let's share it. Let's have the land of plenty that we've always dreamed of. This is something
Absolutely.
that's anathemic to the way they think.
Christophe and I have had a lot of discussions about the hierarchy issue and about the
Oh yeah, big time.
fact that you know there's a big stake in preserving the hierarchy. But I've noticed something. I was talking to Jillian about this the other day, and basically it's that you see in many cases when there's a power structure that men come into where there's a female leader, men will absolutely bow to that leader with no problem. I mean, it's like, you know, when their job depends on it, when, you know, or if it's even in a video game, you know, like we're in a video game where there's an alliance and it's led by a woman, you know, and so all these guys, and some of them are Trumpers and everything else like that, you know, they call her boss, they follow what she says, you know, and there's a, you know, like, it's like once they flip that switch, you know, everything works fine. And I don't know what it is that prevents people from flipping that switch.
I find that so interesting too, you know, because I worked for the city of San Francisco for 3 years. I clerked for 2 years, and then I worked for the city. And there were many female department heads. You know, I was in my position, and there was also others. And, you know, obviously in the police department itself and the sheriff's department, there's been female lieutenants, you know, there was a female captain, et cetera. It does happen. And even there's obviously female CEOs, et cetera. It's so interesting to me to see the dynamic of why some people succeed and don't seem to face problems and others do. And I don't know if it's just, I don't blame these particular actors, right? It's a very interesting phenomenon. I'm sure there's been research about this and, you know, the organizational development and how this phenomenon is occurring. And obviously it's so dependent on so many factors, but it's, you know, how is it that some leaders are trusted more than others? What is the quality in a female leader that makes certain men who've been hard-baked misogynists suddenly flip the switch, as you say? And how can we teach those skills to all the other women who want to be successful so that we can manage ourselves? I mean, part of being a leader is managing yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying we have to bow down to what these men want, but I just would like to know if there's a set of skills, you know? It's interesting.
I don't even know if it's the women though, because like, for example, well, take Hillary Clinton. You know, she is the most competent person to ever run for office of the president of the United States. And yet, you know, she just induced rage, you know? And I mean, I thought that she had that game. When I saw that photo of her on the military transport plane with her phone, that famous photo that everybody, you know, like that is the boss. She is in charge. I would follow her anywhere. You know, that's how I felt about it. You know, I didn't have any of this antipathy, but yet you see Joe Biden with similar policies. He's doing about 10% better overall in the primaries than somebody who with the almost exact same set of policies. And so the only answer is sexism. And so I don't think that was Hillary's fault. Hillary was solid.
No.
Yeah. You know, it's, I just want to chime in here because I was thinking as you guys were talking, and thank you both for that. I think that was really interesting. You know, my bosses, I work for a company called Practical Law, great company. And one of the reasons why I'm still there is because it really is just a fantastic place to work. But one of the reasons why, you know, I have two bosses that run my team, the L&E team. I'm a writer. I write products, right? So that from a labor and employment perspective. And so, and what we call resources. And anyway, both my bosses are women, and they run, and you know, what's consistent about Practical Law, and this sort of folds into our hierarchy conversation, Sean, our ongoing hierarchy conversation. And that is that it's a relatively flat organization, right? So yes, you know, first of all, each little team operates very like sort of independently for one, and also within the team, like, you know, there's not a bunch of power, you know, sort of power sources. And some of the most powerful people in the company are women. And what I have found as a result of that is far more collaboration, far less toxic, you know, competition. And of course, it's competition. We're all human beings. We were talking about factionalizing earlier, like that happens, but like, compared to my experience working at a big law firm, male-dominated litigation section, a lot of chest beating. Litigators can be the worst, as I'm sure you know, Jordanna. There are some really obnoxious male litigators out there, with their feet up on the thing, like all of that, right? But like all that stuff is a huge distraction. And this is what I'm getting at, is that I find that women under both of those situations like respond differently in my experience. So, this is not a scientific study; it's just my observations. But women in a more hierarchical environment sort of become that, right? And so, right, and become like a female version of that same guy with his feet up on the thing, right? And then that's when everyone's like, oh, she's so bitchy, right? But really, it seems to me, again, I'm just theorizing now. It seems to me she's trying to find a way to make it in that environment. Yes. On the other hand, because that's the way that environment works, right? And finance is like that. Big law firms are like that, right? All of those places are like that. Pretty much every company in New York over there is like that, right? Yeah. But on the other hand, you have in practical law, in a much more collaborative environment, I feel it seems to me that women really shine in that environment. Like, and what ends up happening is that, and the men are, like you're saying, Sean, are much more just like, yep, this woman, this is the boss. This is
in charge. It's like she gets all due respect of anyone who's in that position.
And I'm not saying that women should now change to to accommodate that. I'm just trying to explain. I'm just trying to like throw a spitball. From my experience in corporate America, what I've seen.
Yeah. I agree that it is sort of like you are becoming like the enemy. You're just, some people are just desperate to find a way to survive sometimes too.
Sure.
Facing their own stress. They might have a medical issue or whatever. They have to keep the job, so what can they do to become like this person, and the best leaders are those who have a democratic style of leadership within an organization and who seek the guidance and the input of their subordinates, like enacting a policy. It's important to talk to people who are actually going to be affected by that policy instead of just handing down a directive from above. And that, I think, is the old way of doing things. I think that women are more likely to engage in that collaborative process because, again, it goes back to how we've been socialized, generally speaking, right? We're socialized to kind of ask for help or ask other people, well, what do you think? That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But, I think there is a time that's called for, straight up executive leadership where decisions have to be made. But if a person has set the stage with this notion of the collaborative process, when they do kind of, enforce something or make a decision without asking anyone, the people are less likely to rise up, in rage. How dare this woman, make a decision? And I think that might be some clue based, building on what you're saying, that maybe that is a reason why some women have been more successful than others in leadership positions in organizations.
Yeah, women. I love working for women personally. I mean, I just because I find men to be in general pretty toxic. Just in general, like in life, right? Like in life, right? Just because like. I'm just not a chess beater, right? And so like my entire life, I've had to sort of be around chess beaters, right? And it's just not how I roll. But I think that, certainly in corporate America and certainly in the government, like balancing the women to men ratio is just so critical because, men are impulsive, men are combative, men are a bunch of different things and I'm not saying every man's like that or every woman is not like that. I'm just saying though, like in terms of general traits and men and women are not the same. And so having both of those elements,
if you think about it,
you end up having a much more complete organization, right? And a much more effective organization, I think, in the end.
If you think about it in terms of a positive and a negative polarity, right? So if you think about masculinity, that would be in some senses, aggressive, competitive, all those things that's very forceful, right? And without a check and balance, you can just overshoot everything, right? So that's the positive polarity. The negative polarity coming in, not saying women are negative, but just in terms of a system, of what you talked about, Jordanna, of collaboration and looking for feedback. So it's a sort of temper. So you have these two, and if they can work together, instead of at odds, you get a much better outcome in general. And so, it's like in engineering terms, we call it an open loop system. If you just have masculinity out of control, it's an open loop system. No feedback, no feedback.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing struggle for someone like myself. I just first chaired this trial. We were successful. We got a
Oh, that's awesome.
great verdict. Yeah, it was a long couple of years getting this case ready for trial, and we did one of the last civil jury trials in California. It was a 6-week jury trial in San Diego, and we had a 2-week bench trial before that.
Wow.
So it was really a very lengthy process. And then of course, all the preparation that went into it, and the discovery and there were battles, and it was very, very difficult. They had a lot more resources than we did on the other side, and we had to fight for everything. And, in the end, the jury saw what was right. But I was first chair of that trial, and I had to assume a position of authority with my colleagues, including with my former boss. And that was a really interesting process, how that happened. And, me I had already led, I'd been in charge of a city department. I'd had my own business for years. And so, and I had already functioned as a leader, professionally speaking. But this was a new role for me I had been first chair of a trial before, and nothing of this length. This was, even the other lawyers had never tried a case of this length. I mean, this is very unprecedented, as any litigator will tell you, to have an 8-week trial.
Long case.
It was a great experience. I would do it all over again. I love trying cases. I love, especially complex cases. The more complex, the better. It's just something I love doing. But it really called for a new way of approaching leadership to do this, especially when I was dealing with lawyers that were, I had one female associate she's an 8-year, I'm a 16-year practice. And then there was our co-counsel, and then my boss who's been practicing for, like 40 years, and my former boss. So it was a very interesting dynamic. I had to learn some new skills about how to moderate my, direction to people.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to just do it off the cuff the way I normally would be, but I did follow my instincts quite a bit. And I think that a lot of it is that's what's called for, to do that, to be a leader, to be, when you're stepping into a role that's uncomfortable for you, the collaboration, really calling for everybody's opinion, and meaning it legitimately, not just lip service, like, oh, what do you think? You really have to mean it. You have to want it, right? And I hope that as we go into this new phase of our society with Biden in charge, I hope we're going to have a process like that, a reconciliation process where we're asking people, what do you think? What do you want? And what do you need? And checking in with people. Because this is what I think people want at this point, is to be asked what it is that they need. I don't know what we're going to do with people who refuse to participate. That's the problem.
I think that, over time, it shifts. And like I said, it's like flipping a switch sometimes. You get these guys, they are hardcore, they are Trumpers. They don't want to admit, this stuff, but they will work for a woman if they have to. And so I think in some cases it's laws, it's like Hillary said, you don't change hearts, you change laws, but it's also norms. It's also us guys calling out when we see it, and
So
refusing to stand for it, and I'm not even talking about just in the workplace. I'm talking about if you're out with the guys and you're in a bar and you see some of this stuff going on, like shut it down right now. That's the key.
Sorry, go ahead, Jordanna.
This is something that a lot of whites don't want to discuss and talk about, is the racism of other whites. And so when you're confronted with it, the harmless joke, the joke that may not involve a slur or a word, but nonetheless is a statement of generality, a stereotype about people or women, it could be as well. But this is something that it happens with whites. They'll just sit there in silence and just say nothing. And I think it's our duty to speak up. I've even had, one time I saw a crime committed on a Muni bus in San Francisco. It was actually a very severe crime. These girls attacked a gang of 4 girls. I call it a gang because there's no other way to refer to it. It was a pack of kids. They were teenagers, and they attacked 2 women on the bus, and you could see the fight as the bus pulls up to the bus stop. You can see this fight happening, and it was a serious. I mean, it was brutal. The girl took the lady's arm, and it was like a turkey leg, like bit into it. I mean, it was like everyone's all, oh, like, you know, I mean, we're all standing there waiting for the bus, like, oh, bus, where are you getting on, you know? And we're like, oh no. And like people were just flooding off this bus because they wanted to distance from the brutality. It was like, if you ever seen a cat fight, it was like a rolling kind of like pit of people, like rolling end over end, like just all out. So
wow.
the women were both beaten. There were two women, and then the girls kind of got off. Two of them got on another bus that was also at the bus stop, and that bus drove away with nothing. And then the other girls went away, and I guess one of the women had asked them to be quiet on the bus, and they were talking about, they had gotten suspended for fighting someone at school, and they were very loud. And so then the one woman said, you know, can you keep it down? And they went crazy. So according to bystanders. Well, then I called in the cops. I was working for the city then. So I reported it along with multiple other people, and two of us stayed around and agreed to make statements. And so the cop picks me up, and they had detained the two girls, you know, around the corner. And so he's like, I'm going to drive you over there. And I was like, I don't want to see that. I don't want anything to do with this. You guys can I'll come down later and do that. He's like, no, it's fine. Just ID him right now. We'll arrest him. I'm like, okay. So I go I'm in the back of the cop car, which is filthy, by the way. And so we go around the corner. Disgusting. I never want to be back there. So we go around the corner and we look, and then there they are. It's them. You know, they got him like a block away. So they got him. And the cop, white, you know, starts going off and using like racial terms that I will not repeat, saying that. And I'm thinking to myself, so you want me to say this at the trial? Like, this is what you said? I mean, it's like, how dare you? You're just going to assume that you can say this to me? I mean, it's demeaning and insulting in its own right for a white person. And that's the way whites have to start thinking about reframing it. It's like, how dare you assume that I hold the same views that you do, that you're racist, that I'm racist like you? Because
that's what it is. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I feel embarrassment whenever I start to see men making, you know, sexist jokes or white people making racist jokes. It's embarrassing for me, you know, and I'm just like, you're going to actually make me have to say something to you. You don't already know that this is a problem.
Exactly. You know what? One of the things that I say, like, and as I've said, and I'd say it a lot, I grew up all in a very white environment, and you know, and so a lot of people that I know to this day are white, and my closest friends, et cetera. So, you know, a lot of times I'll get fairly or unfairly questions about, you know, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? Blah, 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 especially since George Floyd's death and murder. And so I like to say this, it's just like, don't be a safe space for your families, especially, because that's the hardest one, right? Your family's racism, their sexism. Don't be a safe space. It's like the simplest little thing you can do, and it's hard. I get it, because we, like Sean, you talk about this a lot, and that is confrontation is not, like, human beings, like, you know, people are conflict averse, right? They don't want to make waves, right? Like, people just want to just sort of do their thing and move on. But one of the simplest things one can do is say, like, no, you know, and I had to do this. I you know, played hockey for years, and in the locker room I had to do this all the time, which is just like, no, and this, especially like gay slurs, right? And like, you know, homophobic slurs is a big one among men, right? And I just like, no, like, not on my team. And by the way, I actually ran my own team specifically so I could make the rules, right? Because I wouldn't play on anyone else's team. I only played on my own, because if I played on someone else's team, I knew I would hear the slurs. I knew I would hear it. And I knew that they were probably talking about me the same way when I wasn't there.
Yes.
Right? Yes. 100%. Right? I could feel it. You could probably deal with this, Jordanna. You can like feel, I bet you can feel misogyny. I can feel racism from people, even if they don't say a goddamn word. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it in their attitudes. And because, you know, they don't want to say it to me directly, but as soon as I leave, I know they're saying it. I know they are, you know? Yeah. And again, I think that one thing that people of all races and all genders can do is, you know, with respect to other people, you know, just call people out, or just say, like, no, that's not cool, man. Like, and people will feel really embarrassed when you do that. Like, you're gonna, like, people will just like crawl into their holes of shame when you're like, nah, dude, that's not cool, man. Like, that's not cool around me. Like this, and that's all you have to say. Yeah, that's not cool, bro. Like, that's fucked up. You know, that's it.
Yeah.
we're getting pretty long on our time now. I think we're about an hour and 15 or something like that. So I think it's a good note to end on, though. Just in terms of just us all encouraging each other to go out and really, make that difference in our daily lives, just with people. And it also, that is also ultimately going to give people hope, because in order to recover from the Trump era, it's not just getting rid of Donald Trump, it's getting rid of these attitudes, which, I don't know if they're worse. I mean, like we said, we just could be seeing them more openly now. But whatever it is, this is maybe a situation where the Trump era had to be us getting worse so we could get better.
Exactly.
It's like a form of homeopathy, where you take the poison. In this case, it was like a bucket of the pills instead of just like a few under the tongue, right? But yeah, I was noticing, I started thinking to myself, because I like numbers. I've always had that. I mean, I love words, and I was always drawn to English, but I have a really good memory for numbers, and I kind of like to live by numbers in a way. And I have this whole visual thing with them that I won't get into. It's too weird. But anyways, I was noticing in the calendar, and I looked how many days until the election. And today is 101. And so tomorrow is 100 days until the election. Okay. And so to me, that's just such a nice round number. Like this is like a very big number for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
So I started thinking, I started thinking about, like, what am I going to do to bring hope and positivity to other people and to provide resources and be a leader during this process for the next 100 days. So I'm going to try to post something every day. I made a little list in my mind, more positivity, definitely. And, kind of going on every day, finding a new resource, I should say, for election security, there's a lot of things that attorneys can do. There's people that are needed in other states to kind of monitor the security of the election and the collection of ballots. People are already asking. I belong to a Women for Biden group, and people have been asking, they're scared, the post office situation, and, they can research in their town, they can go and research, can they drop off at the Department of Elections or city
drop off your ballot.
Exactly. And we may need to devote resources to, driving people, not driving the ballot in, okay, but driving this person to drop it off, or whatever it takes. But I'm going to devote myself to trying to post something every day for the next 100 days that will be of service to others. And I encourage everyone else that's watching to do the same, and, to know in your heart that victory is coming very soon.
That's fantastic. It makes me really feel good to say that.
Are you going to run for office or what? I mean, Attorney General sounds really good,
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right now, I need to make some money so that I can do something and take on an endeavor like that, because when you're running for office, it's like a full-time job, and I can't afford not to work right now. So I'm hoping to make some money. I love trying cases too. I always thought maybe I'd want to be a judge, but I just think it's like going in-house. It's like, on one hand, I would love to do it because I love business, and I would love to run a great organization, but then I'd be jealous of our outside counsel. I'd be like, I'm getting more,
You can't try cases, right? You can't try cases.
You got some fire left. I think maybe it'll be a while. Maybe in 20 years you want to be a judge or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's good too to have a lot more trial experience when you're a judge, because that's what you're going to be doing, is overseeing. Unless you're in certain, it depends what you're doing. Obviously, there's different roles, but like LA has 683, I think we're up to judges. I mean, it's larger than most LA County. It's larger than most countries in terms of the judiciary. It's massive, and so you need to have trial experience. You need to know what you're doing in there for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jordanna, for being on, and Christophe, you want to sign us off?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks everybody for watching. Jordanna, thank you so much for being here. You are an inspiration. And I am going to be taking that challenge. I'm going to try and do something positive every day on my little sort of, microphone. Obviously, Sean, thanks for being here. I'm going to, what else do we have to say? This is the Radical Secular. We're really happy to have you here. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll let Sean just do the last word.
Yeah, we'll see everyone next week.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me. It was a great time. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
All right.